They moved me into the garage with a twin bed, so I moved my name back onto the house and locked the door. The rain started as a mist, but soon soaked through my coat as I stared at my 4 suitcases, lined up like accusations, on the sidewalk outside what used to be my home. I stood there under a sky that seemed to mourn with me, clouds sagging low, wind curling around my ankles like a warning. The taxi pulled away slowly, its red taillights shrinking into the wet grayness of Maple Hollow's quiet street. My suitcases, 2 large ones, a carry-on, and my travel bag, sat like unwanted guests on the curb, each one zipped up tight, their silent judgment heavier than the rain. My hand trembled as I reached for the envelope tucked under the cracked handle of my navy suitcase. The paper had softened with moisture, the ink starting to blur, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Sharp, hurried strokes, always slanted forward like it couldn't wait to be done with you. Heather, my daughter-in-law. If you want to stay here, the garage is open. Your loving daughter-in-law. That last line stung more than if she'd said nothing at all. I stood there, still as a grave marker, the rain dripping off the ends of my hair. The letter crumpled in my hand. I didn't need to guess. I knew exactly what had happened and why. But knowing didn't soften the blow. It only made it hurt more honestly. Before the rain could soak into my bones, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I had memorized years ago, the customer service line for First Federal Bank. My fingers moved with a steadiness I didn't feel. First Federal, this is Deborah. How may I help you? This is Eleanor Kincaid. I need to confirm that my mortgage payment went through last Friday. I heard the clicking of keys through the line. The polite pause. Then, yes, Mrs. Kincaid. We show your automatic payment of $1,943 was processed on time. Thank you, I whispered, and ended the call before my voice could crack. I'd been paying it, every month, quietly, faithfully, even after the deed was transferred to Bradley and Heather, even after they promised to handle it, even after Richard passed and the silence in the house had stretched longer than any conversation. I looked back at the garage, the small side door slightly ajar. A sliver of yellow light spilled out like pity. I didn't walk to the door right away. I stood in the rain. I let it hit my shoulders, slide down my cheeks, baptize the hurt that had been building inside me for months, years maybe. I had loved this house. Not the wood and the shingles and the plumbing, but what it had meant. Richard and I had built it when Bradley was still small enough to crawl into our bed after a bad dream. We'd chosen the paint colors together, argued over kitchen tile, planted the red maple in the front yard the year we celebrated our 20th anniversary. We'd lived every page of our marriage here, and now it was no longer mine, not legally, not emotionally, not even a corner of it. Only the garage. I gathered my suitcases one by one, wheels protesting on the uneven driveway, and rolled them inside. The garage was ready. That was the cruelest part. Someone had taken the time to prepare it. A twin mattress sat flush against the concrete wall. A single nightstand beside it, holding a lamp and a glass of water already going stale. My books, my framed photos, my little ceramic birds from the windowsill, all of them stacked neatly in boxes marked with black Sharpie. Mom's stuff. I sat on the edge of the mattress. It dipped with my weight, springs creaking, the concrete beneath chilling even through the worn area rug someone had laid down. A cold bulb overhead buzzed, giving off a tired light. I looked around. No curtains, no heater. Just exposed drywall, the faint scent of motor oil, and the low hum of the refrigerator plugged in beside the water heater. I opened one of the boxes. Inside were my wedding albums, stacked under a crocheted afghan I'd made when Emma was born. My granddaughter, the only warm thing left in that house. A buzz from my phone broke the silence. A message from Bradley. Mom, we need the space. Heather's been asking for a home office for months. The garage apartment has everything you need. Don't make this difficult. Difficult. as if I'd been the one rearranging furniture while people were out of town, as if I'd signed over the deed to kick someone into the shadows. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pound on the door until the walls remembered who built them. But I didn't. That was never my way. Instead, I reached for the lamp and turned it off. In the dimness, I thought of the sacrifices. The second job I took at the elementary school when Richard's construction business dried up. The nights I stayed up with Bradley through his asthma attacks, rubbing vapor rub on his back while humming Amazing Grace. The weekends I gave up to babysit Emma so Bradley and Heather could reconnect. It was all a slow evaporation. Not one thing you could point to, not one moment of betrayal, just the slow drip of being made smaller. I looked up at the ceiling and saw nothing but rafters and spider webs. I could not sleep, not there. Not with my life packed in boxes and labeled like junk mail. So I did what I hadn't done in years. I called Millie. Her voice picked up after the first ring. "Well, I'll be damned. Ellie?" "I need a place to stay," I said, my voice low and foreign in my throat. There was no pause. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. I didn't cry. Not yet. I zipped up the last suitcase, turned off the light, and waited on the step by the garage door like a child forgotten at school. Millie pulled up in her rust-colored Buick, headlights cutting through the rain. She got out in her slippers, threw the door open, and said nothing, just hugged me like I hadn't been touched in years. Inside her house, everything smelled like lemon pledge and cinnamon. Her husband Jim peeked over his newspaper, raised his eyebrows, and nodded like a man who knew better than to ask questions. "You'll stay in Jenny's old room," Millie said, setting a steaming mug in front of me. "The bed's lumpy, but it beats a twin in a damn garage." I wrapped my hands around the mug. It was her favorite one, the one with faded daisies. I stared at the steam rising from the coffee and found myself trembling. "I kept paying the mortgage," I said quietly. Millie sat down across from me, her face hardening with each word I added. "I never told them. I thought it would help." "They're selling it, you know," she said softly. I looked up. Last month, Heather was drunk at book club. Said they had an offer on a house in Oak Meadow Estates. They just had to deal with the loose ends. Loose ends. That's what I had become. I didn't speak, just stared at the steam until it disappeared. "Ellie," Millie said, reaching for my hand. "It's time." "Time for what?" "To remind them whose name was on that mortgage for 35 years and whose name is still paying it." I wanted to say I couldn't, that I was tired, that Richard would have handled it differently, but instead, I said nothing. I looked down at the creases in my palm, the calluses that still lingered from gardening, sewing, life. I went to bed that night in Millie's guest room, surrounded by old posters of her daughter's college cheer team and shelves of childhood trophies. It smelled faintly of dust and lilacs. I stared at the ceiling, the house creaking around me like it was breathing with me. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't forgettable. I was Eleanor Kincaid, and they'd just reminded me who I really was. They thought they were moving me out, but they've just moved something inside me, something they won't like. 3 nights at the Sunset Motel taught me that the smell of old carpet and bleach doesn't compare to the sting of being forgotten. I hadn't meant to stay that long, but pride has a way of making even a sagging mattress feel like a sanctuary when you've been banished from your own home. Room 11 had a flickering neon sign outside the window and a heater that wheezed like it had smoked a pack a day since the 60s. The kind woman at the front desk gave me a discount after I explained I was just between homes, and I let her believe it was a divorce. That felt easier than the truth. On the 3rd night, I sat cross-legged on the edge of the bed, my purse beside me, phone glowing in the dark. I stared at a message I hadn't yet opened, from Heather, timestamped 2 hours ago. "When can you come pick up the rest of your stuff? We'd like to clear out the garage for Emma's playroom." Emma's playroom. My temporary tomb. I didn't reply. I just held the phone tighter until the screen dimmed out. and the only sound was the dull buzz of the fridge and the wind rattling the cheap window. Back when Richard died, I thought giving them the house would be a gift. Heather had just had Emma and they were struggling. Bradley worked too much. She looked tired all the time, and it felt like the only thing I had left to give. I thought if I signed it over, I'd still belong somehow. I thought I was building something that would hold us together. But families aren't held together by deeds or dinners. They either love you or they use you. The next morning, Millie showed up in her Buick, waving off my half-hearted protests. She brought peanut butter sandwiches and wax paper and a grocery bag filled with old college sweatshirts and a house key. "You're not living in that motel another day," she declared, opening the trunk for my bags. I didn't argue. I was too tired to argue. Millie's house smelled like lemon pledge and something always simmering on the stove. She set my bags in her daughter's old room, lined with faded ribbons and a quilted comforter I remembered from a decade of sleepovers. It wasn't mine, but it was warm. And there was something in the way Millie moved, half fierce, half gentle, that made me believe I was safe there. Over coffee, I told her everything. About the payments, about the boxes labeled mom stuff, about the text messages that wrapped a blade in soft words. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my wrist. "You didn't do anything wrong, Ellie. You gave. They took." I shook my head, trying to hold back the hot sting behind my eyes. "I kept paying the mortgage, Millie, for 2 years. I wanted to help. I thought maybe they'd see me." "They saw you," she said softly. "They just didn't care. But now you stop. No more payments." I looked at her, startled. "But what if their credit? What about your credit? What about your future?" She poured more coffee and stood up. "We're going to fix this. First, you stop paying. Second, you talk to my nephew. Bryce?" She nodded. "He's a lawyer now. Elder law, smart as a whip and meaner than a Baptist deacon in court. He'll know what to do." "I'm not elderly, Millie," I muttered weakly. She laughed, short and sharp. "You're not elderly, but you deserve to be treated with respect, which isn't happening." That night, I stopped the auto draft from my bank account. I didn't tell them, I didn't warn them. I just clicked the little toggle, entered my password, and sat in the dark as a strange quietness settled in my chest. It wasn't peace, but it wasn't shame either. The next morning, I found myself walking up the cracked stone steps of Harper & Wallace Attorneys at Law, a squat building sandwiched between the town's only bookstore and a hair salon that still had a mural of Farrah Fawcett on the outside wall. It was warm for spring. My cardigan felt too thick, but I kept it wrapped around me like armor. Bryce was waiting just inside. He looked more like a high school history teacher than a lawyer. Brown corduroy blazer, loafers, the kind of man who probably drank his coffee black and read biographies for fun, but his eyes were sharp, and he shook my hand with both of his. "Mrs. Kincaid, Aunt Millie's told me a lot about you." "Then I'm sure you think I'm a fool." He sat down across from me at his desk, which was cluttered but organized. "I think you've been taken advantage of, and I think you're not the only one." I opened my tote bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. Every payment stub, every monthly printout, every automatic transfer confirmation. I had 26 of them. 26 months of a woman paying for a home she no longer legally owned. Bryce looked through the papers, flipping with deliberate care. He didn't speak for several minutes. I watched the dust dance in the sunlight through the blinds and felt the stillness of the moment settle like snow. Finally, he looked up. "You've been making these payments on a property from which you derive no benefit, while the legal owners collect equity and plan to sell." I nodded, feeling suddenly small under the weight of legal terms. "That could be grounds for what's called an equitable lien," he continued. "It means, even though you're not on the deed, your financial contributions create a legal interest in the property. They can't sell it without settling with you." I blinked. "So I could stop them?" "Yes, you could." "But I'm not trying to ruin their lives," I said quickly. "They're my family." He leaned forward. "And what about yours? Your life?" I said nothing. "I can file a lien petition," he said gently. "It's not fast. It may take weeks, but it's valid, especially with documentation like this." The folder sat between us like a bomb with no timer. "I'll need some time to think," I said, rising to my feet. He nodded. "Of course. But think quickly, Mrs. Kincaid. They might already be scheduling inspections." That evening, I sat at Millie's table again, our cups steaming, the newspaper folded beside us like an old argument. "You're going to do it," she said before I even opened my mouth. "I'm thinking about it." She arched an eyebrow. "You've already stopped the payments. What's one more step?" "It's not just one step, Millie. It's a line I can't uncross." "Maybe it's time you stopped crossing lines for other people and started drawing some of your own." Her words stayed with me long after I went to bed. I lay under that floral quilt, staring at the faint cracks in the ceiling paint, and thought of Richard's hands, calloused, careful, patching those same kinds of cracks at home. I thought of the day we signed the mortgage, our hands sweaty, eyes bright with hope. We were kids, barely 30, with a toddler and too many dreams. We never thought we'd be anything but safe. That house had seen every inch of my life. Bradley's first steps, my first gray hair, the night Richard had his heart attack and I held him while the ambulance lights flickered through the front window. It wasn't just wood and nails, it was me, and they wanted to sell it for granite countertops and a third bathroom. I rose quietly, padded to the kitchen in my socks, and opened the cupboard for a mug. Millie's mugs were mismatched. One said, "World's Best Boss." The other had a faded picture of a cat wearing glasses. I chose the cat. I poured some decaf, stood by the sink, and let the moonlight spill across the floor. I was done. I was done being useful only when convenient. Done financing other people's dreams while mine gathered dust. I was Eleanor May Kincaid, and I was going to file that lien. The next morning, I walked back into Bryce's office and laid the folder on his desk. He looked at me, then at the papers. "Are you sure?" he asked. I nodded. "File it." He smiled softly, opened a drawer, and pulled out a blue legal pad. "We'll start now." By noon, I'd signed the petition. By evening, I was back at Millie's, folding laundry when my phone buzzed. 5 missed calls from Bradley, a voicemail from Heather. I didn't play them. Instead, I stood at the window, watching the tulips sway in Millie's garden, and I smiled. That night, I stopped the automatic transfer from my account for the first time in 2 years. I rang the doorbell of the house I built, waiting to be let in like a stranger. The chime echoed through the walls as I stood on the front porch, arms folded tight over my chest, the air just cool enough to make me wish I'd brought a scarf. It was early afternoon, but the sky had taken on that steel gray tone that warned of a storm later in the evening. My heart thudded with a nervous rhythm I hadn't felt since the first parent-teacher conference I led alone. I could smell the mulch from the flower beds that Heather had insisted be replaced with white stones 2 summers ago, the same beds where Richard had once knelt beside Emma, showing her how to plant daffodil bulbs deep enough to survive the frost. She couldn't have been older than 4. Now I wondered if she even remembered it. The door opened, and there stood Heather, dressed in a fitted navy blouse and white slacks, makeup just enough to appear effortless. She blinked at me like she wasn't expecting a visitor. "Eleanor," she said, using my full name the way people do when they're pretending to be polite. "We weren't expecting you." I kept my voice steady. "I need to speak with you and Bradley." Her smile faltered just a hair before she stepped aside. "Of course. Come in." I stepped over the threshold and into what no longer felt like my home. The living room had changed. Again. My warm yellow curtains were gone, replaced by gauzy gray panels. The deep brown leather recliner where Richard used to sit had vanished. In its place was a hard-lined cream sectional that looked more like a display piece than a place to rest. The photos on the mantel had been rearranged too. The portrait of Richard from our 25th anniversary? Gone. Replaced with a canvas print of Emma in a ballet recital. I didn't belong in this room anymore. I didn't belong in the house I had paid for, built around my family like a nest. The air smelled faintly of lavender and something artificial. Not the scent of bread baking or pot roast slow cooking, just the sterile calm of a home staged for sale. Bradley appeared from the kitchen, drying his hands on a dish towel. He wore slacks and a blue button-down, his hair styled too neatly for a weekday at home. "Mom, what are you doing here?" He said it like I was a delivery person who had the wrong address. "I came to talk about the house." They exchanged a look, brief but enough. I stood my ground. "Millie told me you're planning to sell." He frowned, then slowly nodded. "We were going to tell you, once everything was finalized." Finalized? The word came out brittle. Heather stepped in, her tone casual. "We've already had 2 showings. There's been a lot of interest. The market's hot right now." I stared at them, trying to find something recognizable in their expressions. Something of the boy who used to fall asleep in my lap, of the young woman who once brought me flowers on Mother's Day. "This house has been mine for 35 years, I said quietly. "Your father and I—" Heather cut in, smiling. "Eleanor, we understand it's sentimental for you, but we have to do what's best for our family." Our family. And what am I? Bradley stepped forward, putting on that practiced, reasonable voice he used whenever he wanted to sound like he was the adult in the room. "You signed the house over to us. We appreciate everything you've done, but it's our property now. We get to decide what happens to it." I felt the floor tilt under me, but I didn't waver. "I've been paying the mortgage," I said, "every month. $1,943 for the past 2 years. Their faces changed. "That was your choice," Heather snapped. "We never asked you to do that." "I did it to help you," I said, voice tight. "To keep a roof over your heads, because that's what family does." Bradley looked uncomfortable, but unmoved. "We're grateful, but it doesn't change the legal situation." So the 35 years I lived here, the money I gave, the time I spent raising Emma while you were busy, none of it matters? Heather crossed her arms. "You're being dramatic." "Am I?" My voice rose, more with sorrow than anger, because from where I'm standing, I see 2 people selling the home they didn't build, didn't pay for, and are still expecting me to finance. Bradley raised his hands. "Mom, you're making this harder than it needs to be. We can help you find a nice senior apartment." "I don't need a senior apartment," I snapped. "I need a son who respects his mother." Heather stepped forward. Her smile was brittle now. "I think you're getting emotional. Maybe we should continue this another time." And in that moment, I saw it, truly saw it. These weren't misunderstandings. These weren't unintentional hurts. These were choices. "I've stopped the automatic mortgage payments," I said. My voice was low, but it filled the room. Bradley's face changed in an instant. "You what? If you want to sell my home, you'll need to pay for it yourselves." "You can't do that," Heather said, voice rising. "What about our credit? We have plans." "I hear Oak Meadow Estates is lovely this time of year." Bradley's face turned a deeper shade of red. "Mom, the house was Dad's gift to me. You know that. It was never really yours." The words hit harder than a slap. "Never really yours." I stared at him, breath caught in my chest. "I see," I said, barely above a whisper. "Then I suppose there's nothing left to discuss." I turned. My legs felt unsteady, but I made it to the door. My hand trembled on the knob. I paused, looked back at the son I no longer recognized. "Your father would be ashamed of you, Bradley, and for the first time, so am I." I opened the door, stepped into the chill of the late afternoon, and closed it behind me as gently as I could. The sky was darker now, clouds bruised with coming rain. I walked down the driveway, not looking back. The street was quiet, only the rustle of leaves and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. My car was parked at the curb. Millie had insisted I take it instead of calling another cab. My hands gripped the steering wheel before I turned the key. I stared at the house through the windshield, heart pounding so hard I thought it might bruise the inside of my chest. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I drove. Bradley looked at me like a stranger, and for once, he was right. He no longer knew who he was dealing with. At 9:03 that morning, the bank called. By 10:17, I was sitting across from the man who unknowingly handed me the key to my freedom. The voice on the other end had been calm, almost apologetic. "Mrs. Kincaid, this is Trevor Alcott from First Federal Mortgage Services. We've noticed a disruption in the payment schedule for the property on Maple Hollow Lane, and we'd like to discuss it with you in person if you're available today." I said yes before I could second-guess myself. First Federal was only 4 blocks from Millie's house. I walked there. The air still held that crisp spring chill that bit at your ears and made the trees tremble, but I welcomed it. I didn't need warmth that morning. I needed clarity. The building was modest, a 1-story rectangle of brick with wide windows that hadn't been washed in weeks. A small American flag flapped listlessly beside the front door. Inside, the carpet smelled like printer toner and old carpet glue. The receptionist gave me a polite smile and gestured toward a cubicle near the back, where a young man with sandy hair and a pale blue tie stood to greet me. Trevor Alcott looked no older than 35, with the kind of nervous energy that said he knew how mortgages worked better than people. He offered me a firm handshake, then gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Thank you for coming in, Mrs. Kincaid. I hope I didn't alarm you." "I've had worse calls," I said, folding my hands in my lap. He glanced at his monitor. "You've been making regular payments on the Maple Hollow property for over 2 years. Our records indicate that the property is not currently in your name." "That's correct. I transferred the deed to my son and daughter-in-law after my husband passed, but I continued the payments." He nodded slowly, brow furrowing. "I see. Well, here's the thing. Your name's not on the title, but given the consistent financial contribution, especially over this length of time, you may be in a position to file for what's called an equitable lien." I blinked. "I'm afraid you'll have to explain that to me like I'm not a lawyer." He smiled faintly, adjusting his glasses. "Of course. An equitable lien is a legal interest in a property that isn't based on the title but on financial contribution. Basically, if someone makes payments on a mortgage for a property they don't own, and they don't receive benefit from that property, they may be entitled to compensation. In some cases, it means the property can't be sold until the lien is satisfied." I stared at him, heart thudding. "So I could stop them from selling it?" "If you file the lien, yes. The sale wouldn't go through unless the debt owed to you is repaid or otherwise resolved. It gives you leverage, Mrs. Kincaid." Leverage. A word I hadn't felt applied to me in years. He leaned forward slightly. "I don't usually get involved in family matters, but when I saw your payment record, it didn't sit right. Most people who pay that faithfully aren't strangers to the house they're paying for." "They're not," I said quietly. "I lived there for 35 years. I left the bank with a manila folder full of documents and a name for the leverage I hadn't known I'd earned. Millie was waiting on the porch when I returned. She took one look at me and raised an eyebrow. "Judging by that look, you've either just committed a felony or discovered you're richer than you thought." "Neither," I said, setting the folder on her dining room table. "But I do have a weapon." We spent the rest of the afternoon in the kitchen, sorting through every folder, envelope, and bank printout I had. Millie moved with surprising speed for a woman pushing 70. She organized the paperwork like it was a war plan, labeling sticky notes, opening her ancient accordion file from the days when people still wrote checks for groceries. By early evening, my head ached from squinting at numbers and dates, but I had a binder ready for Bryce. All my proof, Every payment stub, transaction record, text message from Bradley, and even the original letter I'd received from Heather with its sharp-edged handwriting sat inside that binder like soldiers ready for inspection. "Have you eaten?" Millie asked. "I can't remember." She reached into the fridge and pulled out leftover meatloaf, slicing it into thick pieces and heating it up on the stovetop. The smell filled the room, rich and familiar. "You're going to need your strength," she said, sliding a plate in front of me. I took a bite and let it sit in my mouth. Warm and grounding. "You think I'm doing the right thing?" Millie poured us both glasses of sweet tea and sat beside me. "I think you're doing the thing you should have done a long time ago." We ate in silence, the tick of the kitchen clock loud in the quiet. Later, I sat in the guest room and opened my old leather-bound planner. I hadn't used it since Richard passed, but the pages were still clean. I wrote a single line, "Equitable lien, Eastern leverage." The next morning, I returned to Bryce's office. He looked up from his desk, surprised to see me so soon. "I'm ready," I said, setting the binder down. He opened it, flipping through the contents with increasing interest. "This is solid, Eleanor, very solid. With this documentation and the payment history from First Federal, I can file the lien petition by tomorrow." "Do it." He didn't ask if I was sure. He didn't need to. He just nodded and reached for his keyboard. I signed the necessary papers, my name flowing across the lines with a steadiness I hadn't felt in months. As I stood to leave, Bryce said, "This will buy you time at the very least, and possibly more than that." "What happens next?" "They won't be able to sell the house without settling with you. They'll find out about the lien soon enough. When they do, expect a reaction." "I'm counting on it," I said. That afternoon, I stopped by Rosie's Cafe for a coffee and a moment of normalcy. The little red and white awning fluttered in the wind. I hadn't been inside in years, but the smell hit me like a memory. Fresh brewed coffee, fried potatoes, old vinyl booths with names carved into the edges. Rosie herself was behind the counter, wiping down the glass display of lemon bars and pecan pie. "Well, I'll be," she said, looking up, "if it isn't Eleanor Kincaid." "Still remember my name?" "Huh?" "Hard to forget a woman who used to bring in the best banana bread during church bake-offs." I smiled. "I saw the sign in the window. You looking for help?" She blinked. "Waitressing?" "I waited tables all through college. Still remember how to carry 3 plates at once." She studied me for a long second. Then she smiled. "Come back tomorrow. I'll give you a trial shift. Wear something comfortable." I nodded, feeling a strange flicker in my chest. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was just the thrill of making a decision that was mine and mine alone. Back at Millie's, I took a long, hot shower and sat on the edge of the bed in my robe. The house was quiet. Jim was watching a baseball game downstairs, the sound low and steady. My phone buzzed. Bradley. 5 missed calls. Heather. 3 voicemails. I didn't listen to them. I placed the phone screen down and leaned back against the pillow, letting the ceiling blur above me. The first crack in their plans had formed. And I was the one who'd made it. That night, I signed the lien petition with a firm, unwavering hand. Bradley showed up at Rosie's Cafe wearing a $1,000 coat and the look of a man who'd just been told his castle had termites. It was just after 5 in the evening. The dinner crowd hadn't yet rolled in, just the usual handful of locals hunched over coffee or meatloaf. The bell above the door jingled as he walked in, bringing a gust of cold air with him. I nearly dropped the pot of decaf I was pouring when I saw him. He looked so out of place. That tailored wool coat, freshly cut hair, leather shoes polished like glass. Everything about him screamed boardroom, not small-town cafe. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. "Mom," he said softly, as if he'd practiced the word before coming inside. I set the coffee pot back on its warmer and wiped my hands on my apron. Rosie caught my eye from behind the counter. She gave me a small nod. "Take your time," it said. I gestured toward the back booth, the one in the corner, furthest from the windows. It was quiet there, mostly shielded from the kitchen's clang and chatter. I slid into the booth and waited. Bradley followed, hesitated for a second, then sat across from me. "You look different," he said, adjusting his cuffs. "I am different." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. A beat passed. "About the house," he began, voice low. We need to talk." "I'm not discussing that here," I said evenly. "This is my workplace. If you're here to eat, order something. Otherwise, make it quick." His jaw twitched. "Vanessa and we're in trouble. The bank called about a lien. Our credit score's dropping because of the missed payments." I looked at my son. Really looked at him. The expensive watch peeking from his cuff, the faint scent of cologne I didn't recognize, the restless way his eyes darted around the room. I remembered the boy who once scraped his knee in the driveway and ran crying into my arms. That boy was long gone. "What do you want from me, Bradley?" He leaned forward. "We need you to lift the lien, resume the payments, just until we can sell the house and close on the new one." I blinked. "And what do I get in return?" He hesitated. "We'll make sure you're taken care of. There's a really nice senior community in Westbrook. You wouldn't have to worry about anything." A laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. Not a joyful laugh, but the hollow kind, dry and worn thin from years of being overlooked. "Stop," I said, raising my hand. "I'm not interested in being taken care of. I've been taking care of myself and you for a very long time." His expression darkened. "Mom, be reasonable. You can't keep working here. You're almost 60. 58, I corrected, "and I'm doing just fine." His mask cracked then. "Just a little." The Polish slipped from his voice and a hint of frustration snuck in. "Fine. What do you want? A percentage of the sale? 10%? 20? I stared at him, this stranger wearing my son's face. I studied the desperation behind his eyes, the fear coiling behind his teeth. "I want my home back." He blinked. "That's not possible. We've already made an offer on the house in Oak Meadow Estates." "Not my problem." He sat back, arms crossed, eyes narrowing. "It is your problem if you want a relationship with your granddaughter, with any of us." I swallowed hard. The threat hung in the air, heavy and sour. I tasted it on the back of my tongue. "Are you threatening to keep Emma from me?" "I'm just saying. Families support each other. Vanessa and I have a plan for our future. You're standing in the way." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let my hands shake. I looked him in the eye. "The way I stood in the way when I paid your college tuition? Or when I watched Emma every weekend so you and Vanessa could have time together? Or when I signed over the deed and kept paying the mortgage so you could save for that boat?" His face flushed. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "It's not." My break was nearly over. I could feel the rhythm of the cafe pulling me back, plates clinking, orders being called out, Rosie refilling ketchup bottles. I stood. I need to get back to work. Bradley stood too, his voice cracked slightly. "Mom, please. We need this. The house in Oak Meadow is perfect. We can't lose it." For a fleeting second, I saw the boy again, the one who used to fall asleep with his head on my shoulder, but I couldn't afford to fall for that face anymore. "I'll think about it," I said, picking up my apron from the bench. "But I need something in writing, from you and Vanessa. Meet me at Bryce Wallace's office tomorrow at 2. Relief bloomed across his face. "Thank you, Mom. You won't regret this." As he turned to leave, I watched his back, rigid and upright as he walked through the cafe like a man who had just dodged disaster. But I hadn't made up my mind for his sake. Later that night, I sat at Millie's kitchen table, Bryce's business card between my fingers. The lights were low, the dishes done, the smell of apple crumble lingering from dessert. I hadn't told Millie yet what had happened. I stared at that card for a long time, the ink pressed deep into the white paper, before I flipped it over and wrote 3 words, "Make it final." The next day, I arrived at Bryce's office 15 minutes early. I wore my good navy blouse, the one with the stitch neckline and sensible flats that didn't pinch. I held my folder close, the documentation tucked inside like a secret I'd been waiting to use my whole life. Bryce greeted me with a nod. "You ready?" "As I'll ever be." Bradley and Vanessa arrived exactly at 2, dressed like they were heading into a board meeting. Vanessa wore a sharp black blazer and heels that clicked across the hardwood floor. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for seeing us," she said, sliding into the chair beside Bradley. Bryce sat across from them, calm and unreadable. "Mrs. Kincaid has considered your request regarding the property on Maple Hollow." "We're sure we can reach an agreement," Vanessa interrupted smoothly, "one that benefits everyone." Bryce slid the document across the desk. "This is what Mrs. Kincaid proposes." Bradley picked it up and scanned it quickly. His face shifted, hopeful to confused to angry. "What is this?" he snapped. "That," I said, "is my condition for lifting the lien." Vanessa snatched the paper from his hands and read, "You want us to sell you the house? For the remaining mortgage balance? That's ridiculous. It's worth at least 3 times that." "It's worth exactly what I've put into it," I said. 35 years of payments, upkeep, repairs, and sacrifice. Bradley's voice rose. "You can't do this. It's legally ours." "Not without settling the lien," Bryce replied, "which significantly complicates any sale." "We'll fight this," Vanessa said, her voice icy. "We'll get our own lawyer." "You can try," I said, folding my hands. "But legal proceedings take time. Months, maybe years. In the meantime, your credit will keep falling. And that dream house in Oak Meadow, it'll go to someone else." The silence in the room was thick. "You planned this," Bradley whispered, "from the moment we moved you to the garage." "No," I said calmly. "I endured this. But I'm done now." Vanessa stood abruptly. "We need to discuss this privately." Bryce gave me a quiet nod as they stepped out into the hallway, their whispers sharp through the thin office door. Inside, I sat still, the cool air brushing against my cheek. My hands were steady, my breath even. I had not started this war, but I was going to finish it. Bradley looked at me like a stranger, and for once, he was right. He no longer knew who he was dealing with. The house was empty when I stepped inside, but every creak in the floor whispered, "Welcome back." The key turned easily in the lock, though my hand hesitated a moment before I pushed the door open. The foyer smelled of paint and lemon polish, Heather's doing no doubt, but beneath that, faint and familiar, was the scent of something older. Dusted wood, sun-warmed carpet, the ghost of Sunday dinners. I stepped inside slowly, each step quiet on the freshly waxed floor. It had been exactly 3 months since the final paperwork was signed, since Bradley and Heather walked away with tight smiles and the promise never to look back. They didn't say goodbye, not really. But they took what was left of their dignity and left me what was mine to begin with. The home. My home. I wandered through the rooms like a woman returning from a long voyage. The living room still bore the scars of their style. Cool grays, sharp lines, all the warmth stripped out like insulation from behind the walls, but the bones were still mine. The slanted floorboard near the window still creaked under my heel. The bay window still caught the afternoon light like it had for 3 decades, turning the dust motes into glitter. The kitchen was unrecognizable. The oak cabinets Richard built had been painted a harsh white, and the brass handles replaced with brushed nickel. The counters gleamed, but they were cold. I ran my fingers along the edge and thought about the hundreds of meals I'd made here, the flour dust that once coated every surface when Emma and I baked cookies, the pot roast Richard had loved so much it became a family tradition. All gone. But I had time now. I opened the back door and stepped out onto the porch. The yard looked the same, maybe a little overgrown. The swing where Richard and I used to sit had been removed, but I could still see the indent in the wood where it once hung. The tulip beds near the fence were blooming again, red, orange, and pink bursts that returned every spring like clockwork, planted deep by my husband's steady hands. "I'm home," I whispered to no one, and somehow that was enough. The next morning, while unpacking a box of dishes from Millie's, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find her standing on the porch with a pot of beef stew and a bottle of red wine. "Housewarming," she announced, stepping past me before I could even greet her. "Though I suppose it's more of a homecoming." I laughed, genuinely for the first time in weeks. "Feels like both." She placed the pot on the counter and surveyed the kitchen. "Good Lord, what did that woman do to your beautiful cabinets?" "Painted them white and called it modern." Millie snorted. "You know what else is modern? Throwing your mother-in-law out like yard waste. You gonna keep this awful lighting?" "For now," I said, pulling down a pair of wine glasses. "One step at a time." We sat on the porch that evening, stew bowls resting on our knees, wine glasses sweating in the cool breeze. The sunset stretched long and golden across the backyard, the way it always had. Some things hadn't changed. "Have you heard from them?" Millie asked after a while. I shook my head. "Not since closing. Bradley made it clear I chose the house over them." She turned to look at me, her voice firm. "You didn't choose the house. You chose yourself. There's a difference." I knew that. Deep down, I knew it. But part of me still wondered if Bradley would ever understand, if he ever saw me as more than the woman who paid the bills, babysat the kids, and made herself small to fit his world. The next few weeks settled into a quiet rhythm. I worked morning shifts at Rosie's Cafe, scrubbing tables, refilling coffee, learning the names of every regular who wandered in with aching backs and stories to share. They didn't care that I was almost 60 or that my hands had lost the speed they once had. They liked me because I listened, because I smiled and remembered their usual orders. In the afternoons, I returned to the house and slowly brought it back to life. I couldn't afford to redo everything Heather had changed, but I could reclaim it piece by piece. I hung the old family photos on the mantel, placing Richard's portrait in the center like a compass pointing home. I draped the quilt Millie made me over the back of the couch. I bought a second-hand rocking chair and set it near the bay window, right where it used to be. The den became mine again. I hung Richard's fishing gear on the wall and found his old books in a box labeled Donate. I placed them back on the shelf. Every room I touched breathed a little easier. One Saturday morning, while planting tulip bulbs in the garden, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I stood, wiping my hands on my jeans, as a silver SUV pulled into the driveway. Bradley stepped out alone. He wore jeans and a windbreaker this time. No coat, no cologne. He looked older than I remembered, lines deeper around his eyes, a slouch to his shoulders. "The flowers look nice," he said, standing at the edge of the yard. I nodded, unsure how to begin. "Dad always loved tulips," he said. "I remember him planting them every fall." "So do I," said, brushing dirt from my palms. We stood in silence. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of fresh soil and lilacs. We didn't get the house in Oak Meadow," he said finally. "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, and I meant it. "We found an apartment instead. It's small, but it's teaching us some perspective, I guess." I waited. "Vanessa's pregnant again," he added. "Baby's due in January." "Congratulations," I said, my voice soft. He looked down at his shoes. "Emma asks about you. She doesn't understand why we don't visit Grandma anymore." A knot formed in my chest. I missed her more than I'd ever admit. "She's welcome here anytime," I said. "So are you." He met my eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a flicker of the boy I once knew. "I've been thinking," he said, "about everything, about what happened." I didn't move. "I'm not saying we handled things well," he continued, "but you chose a house over your family. I don't know if I can forgive that." The flicker dimmed. I took a slow breath. "I didn't choose a house, Bradley. I chose not to be erased. There's a difference." He didn't answer, just gave a small nod, turned back to the car, and left without another word. Later that evening, Millie and Jim came by, along with Rosie from the cafe and Bryce and his wife. We sat in the backyard with paper plates on our laps, fireflies blinking in the tall grass, the hum of laughter rising over the gentle music playing from a speaker. I looked around at these people, not bound to me by blood but by kindness, and felt something settle in my chest. Peace. Mildred stood and raised her glass. "A toast," she said, her voice bright. "To Eleanor May Kincaid, who reminds us all it's never too late to reclaim your life." Everyone clinked their glasses together, eyes warm with pride. I smiled, the kind of smile that comes from deep inside, where truth lives. Later, after they'd gone and the stars had come out, I sat alone on the porch swing. The house creaked behind me, familiar and alive. I thought of Richard, of the years we shared and the life we built. I thought of the son we raised, the love I gave, and the woman I became in his absence. Not a burden, not a placeholder, not someone to be tucked away. The woman I was now sat with a quiet strength that no longer asked to be noticed, but could no longer be ignored. That night, I sat on the porch under the stars, and for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone else to come home. I was already there. Somewhere between the sound of the back screen door swinging shut and the kettle whistling on the stove, I came to understand what real peace felt like. Not the peace that comes from everyone agreeing with you or the world going quiet around you, but the kind that rises up from your bones after you've finally stood up for yourself. I never thought I'd see the day I reclaimed my place under my own roof, but here I am. I still catch myself reaching for silence, expecting to tiptoe around people who no longer live here, no longer have power over me. Funny how long the echo of being overlooked can linger in a home, but with every cupboard I open, every floor I mop, every laugh I share over coffee with Millie, I take a little more of it back. It's strange, you know, when the ones you love most become strangers before your very eyes. I gave my heart to this family. I gave my years, my savings, and my health, thinking, hoping it would be returned with respect. Instead, I was folded like a sheet and tucked into the background, patted on the head like some relic. But dignity, true dignity, is not something anyone can hand you or take away. It's earned, quietly, over years of standing tall when you've been shoved into corners. There was a time I believed my worth depended on being needed, that as long as I kept paying, giving, staying quiet, I still had a place. But kindness, when misunderstood as weakness, becomes a weapon used against you. That realization stings like cold wind through a broken window, and yet it's also the moment everything changes. I stopped buying their love. I stopped financing their comfort while they questioned my presence. I stopped apologizing for breathing air in my own home. I remember the morning I moved my things out of the garage and back into the master bedroom. I left the door open, let the sunlight pour in across the old quilt, and sat for a moment on the edge of the bed with my hands folded in my lap. The air smelled like lavender and thyme. I'd made it, not just back into the house, but back into myself. That kind of return is quiet. It doesn't shout. It just breathes a little easier. Bradley's face that day in Bryce's office, when he realized he'd lost control, still haunts me. Not because of what I did to him, but because of what he'd let himself become. I didn't raise a cruel man. I raised a boy who got used to comfort, who forgot where the comfort came from. Somewhere along the way, he traded gratitude for entitlement, and I enabled it. I own that. But owning it isn't the same as carrying it forever. It took me most of a lifetime to learn that no one can place your worth if you've already placed it yourself. I might have gray hair and slower steps now, but my voice carries more weight than it ever has, because I finally decided it was worth hearing. This house, This old, creaky, beautiful place is more than wood and walls. It's memory. It's forgiveness. It's proof that you can be broken and rebuilt, all within the same set of keys. I keep a photo of Richard on the hallway table. Not to grieve him anymore, but to remind myself of who I once was when he saw the best in me. I've grown back into her. There's a softness now in the quiet evenings, a kind of grace that only shows up after you've fought a storm and refused to sink. The smell of stew bubbling on the stove, the creak of the rocking chair, the distant sound of a child laughing down the block. It all means more now. I still work at Rosie's Cafe and I still keep my bills paid on time, but now I do it for me, not to earn a place at a table I already built. Emma wrote me a letter last week, said she missed my cookies and the way I always sang when I did the dishes. She asked if she could visit this summer. I cried over that note, not because I needed her to come, but because she wanted to. Children remember who was safe, who was kind, and though her parents taught her distance, her heart knew its way back. I won't say everything's perfect. The past doesn't disappear just because you dust off your shelves, but I no longer carry it like a cross. It rides in the back seat now, quiet and watchful while I drive forward. Justice doesn't always arrive on horseback or with a courtroom speech. Sometimes it comes in the form of a signed deed, or the thud of suitcases dragged down a front porch, or the way a woman stares back in the mirror and sees herself, not as someone who was cast aside, but as someone who refused to be buried. You see, when folks talk about strength, they picture fists and noise. But quiet strength is the kind that builds foundations. It's the voice that says no more without ever raising a tone. It's the woman who bakes her own birthday cake and eats it beside a fire she lit herself. I don't regret loving my family, but I do regret the years I thought love required vanishing. Never again. Some days I still hear Bradley's voice in my memory, softening maybe. Maybe one day he'll knock again. Maybe he won't. Either way, I'll be all right. Because what I reclaimed wasn't just a house, it was me. So if you're listening and you've ever felt like the world moved past you, like your place has been boxed up and shoved into the garage, remember this: dignity can't be taken. It can only be surrendered. And you, my friend, don't owe surrender to anyone. I found my voice, my peace, and my name again. Eleanor May Kincaid, homeowner, grandmother, fighter, woman. And if this story reached your heart, if it made you feel seen, then kindly give it a like. Just a little sign that you're out there too. And subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next story. Because every now and then someone needs reminding that they are not invisible, not forgotten, and never, ever powerless. Justice may come late, but it still matters.